So our second speaker for Stream 4 is Garrett OHara, who was the principal technical consultant at Mimecast. So he was one of the first people to start off Mimecast back in 2015. So he's got over 20 years experience across development, UI, UX, as well as technology communications. So he does a lot of work with organizations to help them understand and manage their cyber resilience strategies. So very topical, I suppose. So he'll be taking us sharing information on how to protect your organization in a remote working world with increasing threats. So it's very topical again. So Garrett, welcome. Take it off when you're ready, and I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the intro. Let me just get my screen share going here. And we should be hopefully good to go. 1 second. Okay. So thanks everybody for having me along, and good morning. It's really great to be here at AusCERT 2020. As John said, my name is Gar. Obviously it says Garrett on the slide, but everybody calls me Gar. So today I'm going to cover what I suspect is going to be a popular topic, in that it's achieving remote cyber resilience. I'm going to start out by looking at the macro trends that have been happening over various lengths of time, but that have kind of coalesced and been accelerated by COVID. Then I want to look at some of the priority shifts that we're seeing with our customers, and I'm going to overlay some results from an IT news survey that we commissioned on what I would call the remote worker problem that some of us are kind of going through. And it's really across two key areas, so awareness training, and then I'm going to touch more lightly on threat intel side of things, but probably more with an awareness training flavor to that also. So am I bored? Well, look, hopefully it's too early in the talk to be bored, right? So and don't worry, there's no poll here. Really what this relates to is the huge change that we're actually going through at the moment. One of the biggest mirrors for the zeitgeist is Google Trends. And look, for those who haven't played with Google Trends, it's really the window into what people are searching for. So it's slightly voyeuristic, but it's a peek into what's on people's minds. The search term, am I bored? It actually saw a 325% increase across the globe between the 8th to the 14th of March and the 22nd to the 28th of March. So a very noticeable inflection point that I'm guessing people can kind of figure out what's going on there. This is a pretty frivolous comparison. So this compares the search terms pants and shirts. And there's a point at the 8th to the 14th of March where you can see it kind of dips off completely. And then it comes back up, and actually they swap in terms of popularity, and it becomes more important to search for the term shirts rather than pants. And again, I'm guessing people can figure out what's going on there. The reality is, look, we're in a very different world. We're into a new set of challenges. I took that photo on the left that you can see there in Wynyard Station in Sydney. It was in the middle of the day. It was just before 2 p.m. And anyone who knows that station knows that normally there's people going in and going out of the train. There's people waiting on the platform. And as you can see there, like, none of that is happening because the world just changed so dramatically. First reports hitting kind of December 2019, which seems like such a lifetime ago now. But really it was February 2020 when, for many of us, the penny was kind of starting to drop. And then it was March 2020 when it felt like everything changed. The Mimecast leadership team, the regional leadership team, we met and decided on the 13th of March we would do a pilot day for work from home. And we actually haven't been back to the office since then. So it's been quite a while. So, we've seen schools shifting to online learning, and that's probably going to continue with digital learning experiences post-pandemic. Healthcare is straining, looking for ways to do telehealth. We're seeing budgets frozen, projects frozen, and sort of a lack of clarity of how funding is going to be unlocked potentially as those programs move into the future. A huge drop in in-person interactions, which really, social distancing has changed the rules of the game. And then lockdown, and particularly in Victoria, I would say, has actually created almost an entirely new game. So we live in fairly strange days, I would say. And ultimately, this is why shirts became more popular on Google Trends than pants, because a little bit like the guy in the photo here, he's pretty happy with the socks. We're seeing this just huge shift. And what I'm going to do during the talk today is I'm going to use responses and stats from respondents to a survey which was conducted in June by IT News on behalf of Mimecast. And we got just shy of 400 respondents, CSOs, CTOs, CEOs, business owners, lots of other IT professionals. A big chunk of them were from large orgs, so seats above 1,000, and the rest were fairly evenly spread across kind of small business and medium-sized businesses, IT industry, education, financial services, healthcare. So a pretty broad set of respondents. So, if you're the guy in the photo, you're feeling obviously pretty happy. But the reality was that the hard lockdown in some states was actually forcing work from home at a scale that no one had really dealt with or seen before, and was all done at very short notice. So you're seeing this huge increase in distraction, anxiety, challenging work-life balances, but people for some reason also kind of relaxed around security. So it's just strange days, but we've sort of settled into it in a way. So talking to then some of the sort of macro trends and what's actually been going on, I kind of see that there's three trends and three different timelines here I would call out as well, but they are kind of coalescing into this perfect storm and just the odd times that we're living to. Australia's first recession in 29 years, huge changes globally. Like we're not in the Marriott and Surfers Paradise. The beer worlds of beers last night was a different experience. And I think an excellent job for the times we're living through, but certainly not the same as kind of wandering around and sort of cracking a can with different people and different foods. So the three trends, like I said, they've got different timescales. The longest term is really this one of global digital interdependence. And it's a long-term shift, I would say. If you think about the people who make filing cabinets, they're not making the same amount of money as they were yesterday or last year because everything is now digital. We're so interdependent and digitally linked through EDI, API endpoints, email, text messaging apps, and everything is tied together digitally. So we're essentially all at risk from how we all do cybersecurity. And what I'd say is COVID has actually pushed and accelerated that digital dependency along. And you see things like Teams, Slack, Zoom, WhatsApp, everything is now digital. So the kind of game has changed. Medium term is the sort of growth in geopolitical and socioeconomic unrest. Again, this has been happening for some time, but COVID is the petrol on the bonfire, and it's accelerating the symptoms, it's accelerating the effects and exaggerating those effects, and it's creating a perfect set of lures, which I'm sure everybody who's at OusCERT is kind of aware of those. So for many attackers, it's the perfect time. You've got a distracted, anxious workforce. And also you've got a bunch of IT teams and security teams who are spinning up collaboration platforms under a massive amount of pressure without the normal time to do analysis and security requirements. So it's a great camouflage for attackers. And what we're seeing as a company is two things. Firstly, it's an increase in the volume of attacks. And then secondly, the sophistication of those attacks is also increasing. The shortest in timescales then, but I would say this is the huge change, is the shift to work from home at scale. And that's putting a massive amount of stress on, call it good cybersecurity practices. Again, this is a trend that was already happening. The increase in flexible workplace as a kind of a desired characteristic. If people were going for jobs, it was often one of the things that you would get in when you're interviewing somebody, is that idea of flexible workplace. And the emergence of WeWork, hot desking, officeless companies, so WordPress being an example there. So again, this is all things that was happening, but now we're seeing it at a kind of a speed and velocity that is just unprecedented. And then you can overlay the perennial problems. So you've got human errors, technical failures, malicious attackers, and really then companies are dealing with the potential for seismic disruption. I think Australia has done very, very well in talking to IT and security leaders. I think we've got a lot to be proud of here. A lot of very exhausted people, but the outcome so far has been, I would say, really, really positive. What I would say, though, is that regardless of the vaccine availability and any kind of exit strategy that New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, WA will have as states or at a kind of national level, there is an expectation that we're going to see this permanent shift in where people work. What you're talking about there is really more of a mobile workforce and seeing that more on a permanent basis, or at least part of a flexible work arrangement. And I think that's just going to be much more common. And I think what that plays into then is the longer term goals for security teams are changing, and there's a bit of a shift in priorities based on those shifting outcomes or shifting expectations of Australian citizens and workers going forward. That word cloud that you can see there with family time and spending less and working from home, that actually comes from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and they do surveys on Australian citizens. One of the questions they asked is the aspects of life under COVID-19 restrictions that Australians would like to see continue post-COVID-19. And for the respondents, 25% of them said working or studying from home was one of the things that they wanted to continue. So what you're then sort of talking about, let me just move forward on a slide here, is kind of thinking about what are those priorities and what's the shift that's kind of happening for organizations. So pre-COVID, you know, the general thing was investment in cybersecurity of some sort. And that's a pretty standard thing, I would say, for most organizations. There's a security strategy, and you know, there's goals around that, focus on investing in security, all the kind of BAU stuff that we're all used to. A fairly big focus on moving to the cloud. So I didn't talk to any organizations that weren't either already on the cloud or had projects in play to figure out how to work or move workflows or workloads to the cloud in some form or another. And then education of users. That wasn't always number 3 for some organizations. That was actually lower down the list, but it was generally somewhere around that set of kind of priorities for security teams pre-COVID. And then, look, COVID hit. We're all kind of aware of what that looks like. And what you saw was this huge, huge shift in priorities for really everybody. Middle of March through to April, really, forget everything. You know, the absolute sort of priority was how do we adapt, how do we survive? And that really was the focus around enabling remote workers. So things like how do we get our VPN to cater for a much higher workload? How do we ship hardware in some cases to people who are now working from home? Just all of that sort of pseudo admin, but things that were just required to keep organizations operational as the workforce just went en masse and stampeded out to work from home rather than working from potentially a physical location behind a pseudo physical perimeter. And what we've sort of settled into then is this kind of, call it new life. I was chatting to a few people a little bit earlier on around this idea that it's starting to feel normal, which is in and of itself a little bit of a, like it's starting to feel a little bit funny, that this is becoming kind of life now. And what we're seeing then is a reflection of this new state and new kind of priorities where we're not adapting and surviving. It's really kind of, okay, here we are. How do we kind of now start improving things? With that, when it comes to kind of remote cyber resilience, one of the big things we've seen in Australian companies is a shift to a much higher priority for the education of users. I'm guessing people who are at AusCERT 2020, look, we're all across what happened there in terms of phishing attacks, just a huge uptick in COVID-related and other phishing attacks and spam and SMS that was coming through. So education of users became much more important because of where people were working and the mental state that lots of people were in. You saw the normalization of this new reality, as I've spoken about already, reflected in the ABS stats, securing against more threats. That tended to take some version of do more with less, but understanding that the threats that were happening were just more significant and there was more of them. Investing in cybersecurity remained, moving to the cloud. Actually, for some organizations, we saw there was an acceleration or a higher priority for some cloud workloads because the penny dropped that an on-prem solution, when you started to work from home, meant it was either load on a VPN or it just couldn't really service the workforce in the same way using a remote connectivity. And then, efficiency and automation, again, around pre-COVID, but just took on a kind of new level of importance potentially as we go forward. And the importance of like the lowered mean time to respond, mean time to protect kind of kicked in. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of pivot over, and I'm going to do something that I'll be honest, I don't normally do in talks, which is kind of like have a bit of a data focus, and maybe it's just a reflection of the time that we're living through. I feel some element of comfort in just looking at raw data and stats and kind of using that as a proxy for what's happening and kind of trying to understand the world. What you're seeing here is data from a report that if you Google this, you can find it. It came out from our global threat intel team. And it's really just a general threat intel report around the first 100 days of COVID. I see questions that just come through. It's actually in the report. I don't know the exact date that this starts at, But if you want, just come to the booth and I can get you the report and we can kind of go through where exactly it started from. I think it starts from mid-February, but I'll qualify that when, if we chat. So looking at the stats here, what you're really seeing is malware detections, huge uptick, business email compromise / impersonation detections uptick, massive uptick in blocked URLs. And that for me is a proxy for that increase in the volume of attacks here. There's no kind of inference of sophistication. This is a pure volume pure volume stat. And that's the thing, we're seeing this increase in the amount of attacks, and then we're also seeing the increase in the amount of attacks in terms of, the sophistication of those attacks, generally playing through with better social engineering that preys on anxiety, distractions, and also the fact that COVID is going on at the moment. So as you can see from the quote from IT News, it's a pretty challenging time for security and IT leaders. So the kind of question I had then, as I started digging through this stuff, was: is there actually a direct line between work from home and increased risk, or is it one of those things we talk about but it doesn't really show up anywhere? And this is data from that IT News survey, where you can see that about 5% of organizations are reporting breaches involved in work from home. And that equates to about 1 in 20. 5% doesn't seem like a whole lot, but actually 1 in 20, when I kind of think about it in those terms, it's a reasonable amount, but it's not the important number, is what I would say. The really important number is actually the 31%, because that number is the number of people who don't know if a breach involving work from home has actually occurred. And for any of us in security, uncertainty or a lack of clarity is often the biggest worry. It's the lack of clarity that is probably, again, causing a lot of stress for IT and security teams. And that then lines up with the stats around using technology. So this is, again, the IT News survey. And when we asked the respondents, how does your organization know if employees are actually following cybersecurity best practice when working remotely? A quarter of respondents actually had no idea whether employees are actually doing that best practice security at home. And that could suggest a few different things. It could suggest that companies have been very distracted purely by the COVID-19 response and everything else that is going on to actually deploy, what they would see as good monitoring processes. And, ultimately what that means in a way is that there's an entrusting of the security of networks to really users, potentially the families that are sharing those homes and those consumer grade connections to the internet. In Australia, people doing flat shares. There's a very kind of heterogeneous types of homes that are out there where the workforces actually are. So that's kind of a consideration. But ultimately, maybe it points to little or maybe no control over the security of potentially sensitive company data. What I would say is that there's really good news here, in that when you look at it, 3/4 of the respondents have organizations that are using some sort of tech to measure cybersecurity compliance, and also to do some kind of testing for employees, which is a good thing. As you'd expect, email security monitoring is the most kind of widely deployed, followed then by web security. I'm going to say that web security in the current environment is actually very good. It's a very fast and effective way, depending on your approach to it, to really kind of either remediate or eliminate end users' abilities to go to categories of websites or known bad websites. So again, an easy win for organizations as they're trying desperately to get that cyber resilience for that remote work, remote workforce. And here's a couple of examples of what those attacks look like. And again, for this kind of audience, I'm guessing everybody's kind of seen this stuff. You'll see an email come through. It's got a link. The link is going to bring you to a credit harvesting site, quite often OWA. Or something like that, where they're just looking for either creds or also things like credit card information, more probably consumer or citizen focused attacks and those kind of things. And then also, interestingly, there's a pretty big uptick in the brand jacking stuff. So things like streaming services, delivery services, where, as everybody knows, people are at home, they're not stuck. I mean, let's be honest, it's quite enjoyable watching and binge watching stuff on Netflix or Disney. But we're relying on those services because we're in lockdown, and we're relying on delivery services because we're in lockdown. And it's fairly obvious that attackers will go and use that stuff and brand jack that. Those large trusted brands for essentially social engineering. So with emails being really the most popular way in, the big question then is how do you actually protect against malicious emails coming into play? And here again is the data from the IT News survey. And look, no real surprises here, I would say, for most security practitioners. We're doing things to block and scan URLs. We're doing things to detect business email compromise. We're scanning for malware. I would say the real surprise here is that there's a number greater than 0 of respondents who apparently don't have any security tools or features to stop malicious emails to remote workers. And I suspect that might be just an artifact of the data. I just hope that's not true. But it's definitely kind of an interesting response. So continuing then to look at data, and I found this one really, really interesting. What you're looking at here is a chart that shows a very strong correlation between users who have had awareness training and a lower incidence of malicious link clicks. So what you're looking at is a chart that really cross-references user behavior. And here we're very much using malicious links as the proxy for that behavior. So it is one sort of attribute of overall user behavior, but it's a pretty strong one to the use of awareness training. And in reality, it's actually a 5.2 times reduction in malicious link clicks for folks who've been through awareness training pre-COVID. I like this. It points to what I suspect many of us, or most of us, or all of us probably know already, which is, the human firewall people is absolutely critical. And for remote cyber resilience, for remote workforces, it's beyond kind of optional. I would say it's actually pretty much essential to bolster that cyber resilience posture for remote workforces. These days, look, you're actually looking at pretty sophisticated COVID-related attacks and retail scams. And one of the issues is that we're all kind of working through this blurred lines of home and work life. And, I'm sitting in my office, which is actually just a second room where myself and my wife live. And that's confusing sometimes. I'm doing personal stuff on work laptops. I'm doing work on personal devices. And we actually had a recent example, a company that works in recruitment, where one of their users logged into personal email and it was on the same device that they use for their work. And, obviously unintentionally, but did send a malicious email to some of her colleagues. And very quickly, actually within minutes, it had kind of hit the CEO's mailbox and it was detected. So, no harm, no foul, didn't cause any damage. But, that sort of work life, the blurred edge and blurred lines kind of makes things a little bit interesting. Interestingly, that organization had just hired a security person 7 weeks ago now. So what I want to do now is kind of dig into what makes good security and awareness training programs. I'm just going to do a timeout here. There's a couple of people asking about the slides. We can sort that out. Don't worry about that. We can get this info out to the folks who are asking. So that's Melissa and Reginder. So yeah, looking at what makes good security and awareness training programs. And I get a little bit of sort of stick for using this quote, but I really like it. I think it's sort of amusing. It's quite old, and people I'm sure have heard it before. It's the idea that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is not putting in a fruit salad, and those things are both true. The analogy here, though, I would say, as it overlays to security and awareness training programs, is that knowledge isn't enough, but actually neither is wisdom. What we're looking for here is good security outcomes, and what that ultimately means is a lower risk profile for the organization. What that means is a change in behavior, and that's a very, very meaningful difference. This stuff, it actually needs to be part of the culture, right? So Bob, who's in accounting, on a Tuesday morning, he needs to be engaged enough to not click on the link because he's a little bit lazy. And even though he thinks that this thing looks a little bit weird, still clicks on the link. Or Alice from HR, needs to be engaged enough to report this weird behavior she's seeing just after she clicked enable macros on a resume that just arrived for a job posting that she didn't actually even know that they had. So what I'm going to say is, in this maybe strained analogy, is that we need the knowledge, we need the wisdom, but mostly we actually need to make the fruit salad. So forget about the tomatoes and let's just make some salad. Yeah. So what does the IT News survey tell us on this stuff? Look, when asked the question, how does your organization educate employees about cybersecurity best practices for remote work? I'm going to say that some of these things, yes, they need to be done from a policy perspective, but I'm going to call it out that maybe they don't change that much in terms of outcomes. And an example of that would be providing lists of guidelines. You actually have to do that quite often. So new starters or with the change in security environments, the reality is that could be done for compliance requirements if you're aligning to ISO standards, for example, or it could be it could be also the cybersecurity insurance is, it's valid that if you don't have those policies and guidelines put out there, that your policy is going to be void. So what I'm going to say though is, as an industry, we're seeing shifts going towards behavior change, and you see that in lots of different places. I saw a talk where somebody from the New South Wales state government was talking about that stuff. And they were engaging a behavior change team. And that is such a good sign, I think, in terms of understanding what we've gotten wrong and how we can do this stuff better. So I'm going to pile in on the data here. And like I say, I don't normally do this stuff, but there's just such kind of rich pickings at the moment in terms of what's out there. This time it's actually from a study Forrester Consulting did, and it was into security and awareness training. I love it because I don't really have to hypothesize anymore on this stuff. I think I'm like many people in our industry where we talk about awareness training and how it wasn't working, and we kind of had a suspicion of what was wrong. And the numbers here actually tell a really good story. Excuse me. If you look at this, like nearly a third of employees are going around security policies. To our friends over in New Zealand, that number actually jumped to a half of employees. So I don't know what that really means, but overall, a third of employees are going around security policies. And what that means is we don't have engagement at the level we need. And people are going around security policies, and that puts our organizations at risk. So we don't have employees that actually understand and are also engaged in the importance of cybersecurity. And I'm going to ask the question why, and I'm guessing people kind of know. It's the traditional delivery of security and awareness training programs, and I've been banging this drum for a little while now, so forgive me for repeating myself, but they're long-winded. They tend to be boring content that people just feel like they have to get through. It gets done on a CBT, computer-based training system, or a learning management system. You watch the video, compliance teams are stoked because they get a 90-95% completion rate, but actually, behavior is not changing in a meaningful way, or at least not enough. And the bit that's missing is the culture. I'm not the only one saying this. There's academics, Kate Jerome out of the business school then in Adelaide, Chirag Joshi, who some people may know, wrote a book on awareness training. Like we're all talking about the same stuff here, that it's a culture play. Employees, they need to look left, they need to look right, they need to look up, down, and they need to see these social norms that say this stuff is important. And if it's not, then we're actually in importance, then we're in big trouble here. We're also in big trouble if people are going to use BYOD, which many people are, and shadow IT because of current situations, meaning they're forced to try and be efficient while they're waiting for the security and IT teams to do what's necessary. And by that I mean requirements analysis and the security analysis that normally happens, but has to be either shortened or, let's be honest, sometimes skipped because we need to kind of spin up platforms very quickly at the moment. So you get Tom, and Tom needs to share a file with a partner org. So what he's going to do is spin up a Dropbox account, or something worse, in a way he goes. And the problem here is that Tom, wearing his happy socks, is at best, he's got knowledge of what cybersecurity is. But if he's not engaged, then he's going to do the Dropbox thing or worse. And we've all got problems then. The second big problem I'm going to say is how we're measuring the success of awareness training, or call them behavior change programs, because so often we're not doing that at all. Fish testing, massively popular and incredibly useful as a point-in-time measure of one very specific security behavior, which is don't click on the link. It's one behavior. Security is much bigger than that. I'm going to say that what that is. It's a test. It doesn't. We know tests don't change behavior long term, not even medium, and probably not even short term. Behavior change takes longer amount of time. It takes a combination of knowledge transfer, application of that knowledge. It can't be passive. It has to be active. And what you're looking for is an outcome where there's knowledge, sentiment, and there's an engagement component to this. So you can't obviously manage what you haven't measured. And that is a missing piece, but it needs to be meaningful measurements of that human aspect of cybersecurity. Because what we've done is used information, and that doesn't change people's minds. Like, that's the reality. You can have important information, and if you get an audience that's not interested, who cares? Like, they're going to go to the beach that's closed. This is St. Kilda. I think this is actually a pretty famous photo now, but I didn't realize when I chose it. And there's people playing football, there's people sunbathing, walking around on the beach that's closed. Information, it's understood by people, but the audience, they're just not interested because they have a life they want to live. And I've talked about this stuff before. Like, the reality is we need to do more and we need to do better. And, authors like Chirag Joshi, academics like Kate in the Uni of Adelaide, lots of people are singing this song. Janan Budge from Forrester, like, there's lots of us kind of saying, hey, we need to do better here. And one of the things we potentially can point to is the advertising and marketing industry and say, well, actually, they're pretty good at getting us to change our behavior. What do they do? First thing is the cadence. Maybe nobody likes ads, but the reality is we get lots of them because of repetition, unfortunately, is the thing that often changes our behavior. And they're also memorable, and they're memorable because they use emotion. So, if you can see the examples here, it could be fear, it could be love of a puppy for a horse, it could be respect. Often it's humor. It's, a funny toilet roll. I love the one in the bottom, the middle bottom, particularly like that. We're looking for graphic designer. It's just brilliant. It really appeals to me. And then, the funny Phuket ad. The point here is we need punch through. We're not getting it. So we need to change how we do it. And we need to change how we message to end users and to employees. If you've got a marketing team, go use them. If you've got a PR team, go use them. Get their input into the messaging that you're using as a security practitioner to those end users. So, threat intel. Look, threat intel is incredibly useful day to day, as everybody knows. Operational threat intel, strategic threat intel. You've got companies like Recorded Future. Calvin Pang is a good guy. He's here. I'm sure would be happy to talk to folks who are into this stuff. But it's really, really useful for improving day-to-day security. The posture and the plans for programs and investments if it's strategic threat intel. I was speaking to a guy called Dr. Francis Gaffney, and he's a guy who runs our global threat intel team. And we were chatting about threat intel, and he actually raised the importance of it as a way to augment and do a better job of security and awareness training. And his comment was that if you use real campaigns, that you're in a position to cut through in a way that maybe is more meaningful than using generic campaigns. And yes, Adam, that is Whopper from War Games, so well spotted. So yes, like the reality is swapping out the generic examples for stuff that's actually come from maybe your operational or technical threat intel. If you've got those feeds, that's really good for using as a way to augment your awareness training program. Right, so here's an example, and this is one our security teams picked up. It was actually a fake LinkedIn profile, and it was pushed out to a number of Mimecast employees. I got it. If the picture is big enough on your screen, and hopefully it is, you might pick up on what I thought was kind of a weird photo. Apparently, it's a stock image of a model. I don't know how to pronounce the name. I don't know if it's Mallet or Malay. But the person was apparently not feeling up to a nice photo on the big day, so it felt a little bit fishy for me, and I didn't connect. But the point here is that our security team there were using timely, relevant information to cut through to the global employee base, and as you can see from the screenshot here, it was Slack. It wasn't email, so they covered a couple of different comms channels. The point here really is that it's not always bad emails. It can be different things. That's the reality. There's lots of stats. Verizon do an awesome report every year. The data breach, the data DBER. I forgot the acronym because I'm giving a talk, so that happens. But everybody knows it. That comes out every year. It's a phenomenally good piece of collateral. 9 out of 10 attacks. Cofense have one. We do one. Everyone says the same thing. Like, you're going to see more than 9 out of 10 attacks that actually do start with email. So what's an example of that? This comes from our Messaging Security Operations Center, or MSOC as we call them, and it's an AusPost brand jacking. again, there's obviously no reflection on OzPost. You know, it's almost a sign of respect that your brand is useful, well known, and respected enough when you're sort of pop up in these things. So there's a zero reflection on OzPost. You know, it's got nothing to do with them. They just happen to be used as a lure in this case because it makes sense, because COVID and because lots of people in places like Melbourne are getting deliveries on a daily basis. So with this one, you see the link comes through, and it refers to a missing delivery package that's come through. And again, people in Melbourne, most of them are waiting for like 2 or 3 packages at any given time. You click on the link, it goes through to a compromised domain. Obviously, nothing to do with OzPost, but it's got a fish kit, but it does have their logo on there. And you know, when you enter your credit card information, then it does this kind of processing requests, and then goes to an SMS verification, which is weird because you notice you hadn't actually put in any mobile numbers. But this stuff is happening all the time. I'm guessing people are well aware of what that stuff looks like. And Gauze, who's just commented in the thread, absolutely looks familiar. And thank you for the example. And Gauze runs our Southern Hemisphere threat research team. So thank you, Andrew Gosney. If you've got any questions on that stuff, by the way, he's a good guy, and hopefully he'd be open for chats. So back to the 100 days of COVID. Again, if you Google that, you're going to find it. But this is, again, threat intel around the number of domains being registered and blocked. The point here is that you're seeing a pretty big upward movement in both the registration and then the blocking of those domains and blocked pages. Apologies for the resolution of the charts, by the way. I did the old school thing and just kind of used a snip to pull them into a PowerPoint. So the ones in the actual report are higher definition. The point here is, those trends, if it was a stock, you'd be pretty stoked for things like, malicious domains and COVID-related domains. It's kind of less of a happy time. So given the spikes, though, what are if the spikes in the domains and the blocking, then it kind of, for me, becomes important to think about the tools, the features that potentially people are using to stop the unsafe web pages. Again, back to the i2 News survey here, and it kind of shines a light on what's out there. Lots of different approaches. Great to see, firewall stuff out there, proxy-based web filters. DNS, I think, is particularly elegant at the moment because it's very easy to roll out, and it actually is a pretty effective. It doesn't get you all the way there, but it gets you most of the way there for blocking website categories and potentially malicious sites in a fairly light way without sort of the full Monty of a firewall rollout. So, good to see that the different approaches there. So then, look, just a quick summary, like the value of TI. Like everybody gets it. Threat intel with the pandemic, we've got more attacks, right? So threat intel is going to tell you about the campaigns. If they hit, what's the impact going to be? It helps with incident response. What's the remediation potentially? Because you understand from the technical or operational threat intel, like what's the remediation that's needed, maybe what tech controls are needed to be put in place, but ultimately you're driving to a better mean time to detect and mean time to respond. The rise in sophistication of attacks is an interesting one. Big Game Hunters, Cosmic Links was one that hit probably a month or two ago at this point, but those step changes in sophistication of attacks are very, very useful to know in terms of trending. And because there, what you're looking at is strategically what are the security controls in the future that you want to set at the right level and to cater for something that maybe in the future could put your business or your organization at risk, but ultimately making everybody aware of new or potential attack types. And this stuff helps with awareness training. So using that and feeding it back into the timely comms that go out to end users. So very close, and I think I'm probably very too close to running over time here, so apologies. But look, a way to think about this prioritization as we move away from the old school perimeter into pervasive is what we call the zone model. Zone 1, establish perimeter. Everybody gets this. It's the moat around the organization. It's protecting email against URLs, impersonation. It's protecting your web traffic. It's data loss prevention. It's all those things that we're kind of used to. I'm going to say that it's moved from physical to much more of a logical separation these days. Moving then to look at the actual perimeter, or inside that, I should say. And here you're into things like EDR, lots of good solutions out there, UBA, AV, multi-factor auth, all of that stuff. Security and awareness training fits in here, and engagement. Also, quarantine remediation activities. So if you're into SOAR, SIEM type systems, like that's where that stuff fits. and kind of has a leg into zone 3, which is then the kind of global threat intel, proactive risk hunting. Something that's become pretty interesting to me is the proactive protection against things like domains that are being spun up, so cousin domains, where what you're trying to do is get ahead of the attack. So, using scanning of the infinite web to figure out, is there a new domain that looks like one of yours that maybe has cloned your website? Does it have an MX record? Cool, let's go take it down before it becomes a problem. And then into your security ecosystem. So again, this is really across the perimeter, but you're hooking into things like Rapid7, Recorded Future, CrowdStrike, Palo, like all the kind of vendors that are in the vendor kind of showroom today, if anyone's going to go and talk to them. That's a connected ecosystem these days, with the utilization of SOC, full-time employees being a pretty key kind of outcome there, lowering false positives, better triage, ultimately, again, driving to a lower mean time to detect and a lower mean time to respond. So, look, we're living through really strange times, going to say that. But I'm heartened. I've been here for 20 years, and I'm heartened to see that as a country, we've absolutely got our priorities straight in this stuff. And back to Google Trends, where the biggest shift in the top 10 trending category for this year for Australia was a 500% increase in the flavored alcoholic beverage category, and that was actually ahead of hand sanitizers and wipes. So, that's the good news story, if there is one, from today's talk. And also, we're obviously very, very keen on our espresso martinis. I know I absolutely am. Those and Negronis are my new obsession, especially since we've moved into kind of lockdown mode. Absolutely, Angus. I totally agree. So, look, thank you. I think I'm slightly over time, but look, if there's any questions, please ping me. Anyone who knows me knows I'm massively keen on chats. LinkedIn is my kind of default mode of conversation. So, jump on, be there. Co-host a podcast if folks are into that, called the Get Cyber Resilient Podcast. You got lots of different types of guest ons there. We talk about cyber resilience generally. So please do ping me. And thanks for your attention today.
Thanks, Garrett. Question from me: where can everyone get the slides?
I got to figure that out. I don't know if there's a mechanism through OusCERT. So good question. If they can connect with me,
comment in the section. I'm sure the guys will chase it up. And
yeah, perfect. We can. Yeah, I would say, John, a lot of those stats. So if that's what people are interested in, the 2 reports, the 100 days of COVID, Google that. The Forrester research, I think that's available, and then the IT news. I think we're just about to release that as well. So, all the stuff is there in different formats. All I've done is just kind of bring it together into PowerPoint.
Perfect. Are you sticking around for a little bit during the lunch break?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, sweet. Thank you very much. So we're going to break for lunch now. Next up, we have Dave Lewis from Duo Security. So I think we might end it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.